Welcome to Tech Intersect. I'm your host, Tanya Evans, and my life and work exist at the heart of law, business, and technology. Yeah, I've earned a few fancy titles and degrees over the years, but the bottom line is I'm a writer, speaker, teacher, and lifelong learner, and I'm really excited that you've joined me on this journey. So what is Tech Intersect? Well, it's authentic, empowering conversations with really interesting guests who demystify complex topics to prepare you for the future. Because your future is now. And it exists where law, business, and tech intersect. Get ready to listen, learn, and leverage. Let's get started. In this episode of Tech Intersect, I speak with Chrissa McFarlane, named as one of the top women leaving their mark on the MedTech field in health IT by Becker's Hospital Review. Chrissa is the founder and CEO of Patientory Incorporated, headquartered in Atlanta. She founded Patientory after seeing the need in the market around 2015 for more personalized and secure consumer-driven health information management solutions. She leverages blockchain's distributed ledger technology to solve for one of this century's most pressing concerns, patient control of their medical data. This episode is being released on April 8th of 2020 during the COVID-19 pandemic, but our conversation took place a couple of months before, even though it is proving to be evergreen and ever important. Time to listen, learn, and leverage. Let's get started. So I'm really excited to welcome Patientory founder and CEO Chrissa McFarlane today. Patientory is a blockchain-based app that promises your health at your fingertips, and she's going to tell us all about that today. I'm so happy to reconnect with you, Chrissa, and I'm really proud of the important and impactful work that you're doing in the health tech space. And after meeting you a few years back, I actually can't believe how much time has passed, but having the great honor and fortune to speak at your conference in Atlanta, I've certainly followed your career and your progress and admired you from afar as a very purposeful and driven person and this amazing woman of color in this tech space. And I'm really excited to share our conversation with the listeners. So, Chrissa, welcome.
Thank you for having me, Tanya.
Absolutely, absolutely. All right, so let's jump in because there's so many things I want to talk about with you. And through this process, I am really going to catch up on the arc of where Patientory began, the origin story, not only for you in tech and healthcare, but then also what led you to found it. And we'll get to that in a minute. But first, I'm always interested in the origin story of why you're so passionate about tech and healthcare, and certainly the combination in the form of what I think I read. I do my pre-work to get ready for these interviews, and I saw in one of your articles that you sometimes describe it as digital health. So I think that all will probably tie it together, but share that part of your story with us.
Absolutely. And yes, digital health, it is still an emergent space in healthcare at the moment. Digital health really came about in late 2010, early 2011. But growing up, I was always, in healthcare, whether that was volunteering at the nursing home, through my girls' club, and then eventually in high school, I went to a science and mathematics high school. That's where I actually started doing research for a principal investigator at the Albert Einstein College of Medicine, and that really drove my passion for the space. Essentially, research is more of a lone field, and I was interested more in the business of healthcare. And I didn't really get into entrepreneurship until after business school. And I think I was able to take that plunge because my family, who are immigrants from the island of Jamaica, I watched them growing up, just starting their own businesses in the restaurant industry. So after, doing health IT consulting, EMR, actual electronic medical record implementation about a decade ago, and then being poached to work at a telemedicine company, I never looked back. I was actually more interested in practicing medicine at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And once I started seeing just how many problems and, issues, in healthcare is broken. I just started to get more intrigued by nature. I just like solving problems. So being at that telemedicine company really made me understand the opportunities, which are the problems in healthcare, which led me to start Patientory.
Right. And, that's the hallmark of every great founder and entrepreneur is being that problem solver. It's not enough, to say, I really love this. I think people will enjoy it or benefit from it, but definitely drilling down on what are some critical core issues and concerns and challenges, problems in need of a solution, and then focusing on that. And so I hear that very clearly in what you've shared. And so let's talk more about Patientory. So you said a bit about why you founded it. What more specifically were some of the issues and challenges that you set out to address and to resolve? And I will say, with the caveat, as a former professional athlete, it's interesting that I'm no stranger to the healthcare system in terms of any number of aches, sprains, breaks, surgeries, and things of that nature. And I also travel a lot. And being, I recently, not so recently anymore, but moved to New Hampshire to teach and do the work in the academic space that I do. And finding a primary care physician, getting my patient records, and it says patient records, but I have very little control over it. And so I find it very challenging and frustrating, and starting from scratch and getting people up to speed on where I am with I'm not going to say how many decades, but quite a few decades on this planet.
Mm-hmm.
And so I suspect that some of that was in your mind as you started to think about what the issues and problems were, and move toward Patientory as being the solution.
Yeah, and I started Patientory back in 2015, and really in healthcare, innovation takes at least a decade. So going into it, I was definitely going in for the long run, but it's now 2020, and I'm assuming you still don't even own your information, um,
Right.
much less that longitudinal history since time of birth, and we see it a lot now, and especially from the legal standpoint in other industries with ownership and of information, the right to remove your information in electronic form. When we look at healthcare, just a couple years ago they were still faxing and keeping
Right.
paper records, much less to try to give that to patients. And that's exactly what I had saw at the telemedicine company. Here we are, we have modern technology, but healthcare is still lacking. Whereas, when we try to get patients in to see doctors, over an app, they couldn't provide their health information, or it was really a tedious process to go through and get access to, when we look at HIPAA, or just the mechanisms and how they were stored.
Right.
Especially since now the electronic medical records company, they make it so difficult to actually be able to share that information. Uh,
Right.
so yeah, it's definitely been a great journey. I'm currently working on work groups with a lot of new regulations and legislations that are happening now to change that narrative. But overall, our focus is really to drive and empower, consumers, patients, with their data. And then when they actually have that data, it boils down to, okay, how can I utilize this information to better improve my lifestyle, but also help your providers, or my provider, get better insights into treatment.
Right. So you touched on a key point in terms of ownership and control of data. And yes, from my own personal experience, having to, I don't know, I had to put on my lawyer hat, where they probably just got so tired of me. They were like, just give her the records. But it really, but it really was, I know we took this test. I know you need the test. Your doctor sent you here to get the test. We can't give it to you, but we can give it to him, and then he'll give it to you. And I was like, this is ridiculous. And I wanted to know sooner than later. So that drills down on this point about data, which also leads to the question of why blockchain. listeners may know, and I will drop links in the show notes for those who are just tuning in or know next to nothing about blockchain or cryptocurrencies and crypto assets, things of that nature. But because a blockchain is basically a different way to store data than our garden variety database, what drove you specifically to this technology to solve for some of the challenges and problems around patient ownership of data?
You love listening to podcasts, but have you ever thought about starting your own podcast? Maybe you want to build a brand, grow your business, or are looking for an excuse to talk about your favorite hobby. Whatever your reason for making a podcast, Buzzsprout is the place to start. Since 2009, Buzzsprout has helped over 300,000 people launch their own podcasts. Buzzsprout walks you step by step through the whole process and will give you powerful tools to start, grow, and monetize your podcast. Ready to get started? Click the link in the show notes to get our free step-by-step guide to starting your podcast today.
Yeah, when we started, we were really driving the API train. We're like all about APIs, and a lot of earlier healthcare technologies actually went that route. But
Mm-hmm.
when we looked at it and build in as, blockchain, the new Web 3.0, it just wasn't enough. And we see blockchain more or less as a trust and security infrastructure, because at the current moment, a lot of these electronic medical records are siloed. So
Right.
there's little to no interoperability there. And then when we get into ownership, the ability to really track through an immutable ledger, that data becomes problematic. Um, so we see blockchain as that really mechanism where we can start to practice that ownership when we're talking about big data, large data sets of information. And then with our platform, the network, it's a decentralized storage system. So we're actually combining these systems onto the network, which then opens up so much more possibilities for the industry when we talk about incentivization, access to data for research, clinical trials, etc.
That is so fascinating, and it really does open up this whole new world. And you mentioned Web 3.0, and as we are ushering in all of these Web 3.0 technologies, artificial intelligence, machine learning, Internet of Things, 5G keeps coming up, and certainly distributed ledger technology and crypto assets. It really is, we are faced with legacy systems that are trying to reconcile how they can best leverage the technology. And I can imagine that because this is more patient focused, or I don't want to say imagine, but did you experience pushback from the legacy healthcare system? Because also data is, there's such a competitive market. I have some other things I want to talk about that later, but these are staunch competitors in the space. And so maybe they're not as willing to share information. So what kind of challenges did you experience when you are interacting with healthcare providers and these healthcare systems?
Oh yeah, that's been the biggest challenge for sure. It's just really a conservative space. When we look at the hospital systems, they're more concerned about information that they're giving away as well, because they don't want it to be easy for their actual patient population to go elsewhere. So as you know, healthcare hospitals are a business. The more that they can keep their patients within their control, the less incentives they have to actually start to open up and share that information. So we really have to come from it from a standpoint of, okay, but here's how you can actually decrease costs. I mean, most of these systems are spending almost a quarter of a billion on their electronic medical record systems. It's pretty expensive. That's one of their biggest debt. And then the EMRs themselves make it hard to actually share that data for the same reason. They don't want the hospital to make it easy for them to go to another competitor or medical record company.
Right.
So yeah, so it's been a challenge in that sense, especially when we really think about blockchain. I don't think any EMR has actually adopted blockchain yet. But with the new 21st Century Cures Act and TEFCA, we definitely see the push, especially from Health and Human Services (ONC), which has been the talk for like the past 18 months in really getting these players incentivized and on the same page to work with vendors like Patientory, which will facilitate actual patients getting ease of access to their data.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so that leads me to one question I just thought of. Are you focused in the United States or in other countries as well?
We are focused in other countries as well. We see the United States is definitely much more challenging because it's much more of a marketplace, whereas in other countries it's a one system similar to the UK and NHS. Um,
Right.
so we are looking at other areas first, which have more or less blockchain adoption at the moment.
Excellent. Yes, I see this. We see this not just in the healthcare space, but on the financial services side and fintech and a range of other things. The complexity of the regulatory system here and the legislative system that has its purposes, to be sure, in terms of consumer protection and all of those things. But the morass of regulations and legislation and the number of stakeholders and constituencies can really bog down a system. And actually, what you've said also highlights the difference, many differences between our healthcare system that is also largely attached to employment as opposed to, public, healthcare for all. Some of those options in other countries, and I can imagine just navigating that is unbelievable.
We hope you're enjoying this edition of Tech Intersect. Our conversation will continue in a moment, but first, a word on an exciting opportunity.
The Tech Intersect podcast is released to the public every Friday, but as an Advantage Evans member, you'll receive first listen access and live Tech Intersect Connect video chats. Premium members also receive a copy of my ebook, The Gen Xer's Guide to Upskilling in a Web 3.0 World, and unlimited access to the video chat replays and bonus episodes. My pro members, ready to leverage what they've listened to and learned, receive access to the Upskilling Self-Guided course and VIP group coaching calls. So as you can see, Advantage Evans membership adds substantial value to your podcast experience. And there are 3 ways to take advantage, see what I did right there, of all that the Tech Intersect podcast has to offer. So subscribe now and let's listen, learn, and leverage together.
And now, back to the conversation.
So, so let's talk about how the service or the application works. I will drop in the show notes and also some additional information for Advantage Evans members who are going to take a deeper dive. But at a high level, how does the app work?
Yeah, so we are actually a B2B2C model. So we have both a consumer application, which is available on the App Store, and then enterprise software solution, which actually we launched at HIMSS this year in March.
Oh, congratulations.
Yeah, so the past, I would say 18 months, we've been doing a beta trial test with the consumer app. Currently, we integrate with Fitbit devices, Apple Watch, aggregates, a person's health data, and from there we give them insights and recommendations on how to improve, their overall living, their lifestyle. We also take in food and calorie information, sleep, so everything that really makes up a person's physiological, medical
Mm-hmm.
health and well-being. And then from there, with the enterprise solution, we focus on chronic ill patients at the moment. So we actually integrate the medical data from the electronic medical records. Providers then are able to create care plans based on our insights for their patients in order to reduce a lot of the costs that the system currently has with in regards to readmissions, duplication of tests, and that care plan shows up on the actual app. So the patient is reminded to, do the necessary steps. And then if they're at risk or flagged because, of some occurrence, the providers or caretakers can actually take preventative measures to avoid an emergency situation. So
Right.
it's a care coordination tool as well.
So that is just so it's multi-layered and not only focuses on ownership and interoperability, but also improving patient outcomes,
Yeah.
which we should all be, that focused on. And and so I can see so many different areas, and it is great to understand now that you have both the consumer solution, but also the enterprise level solution as well, because it is a multi-layered but completely integral and integrated process. The whole point of things being siloed, information, people, systems, and bringing that all together in a way that leads to better results for patients is really an amazing not only idea and concept, but something that you're actually putting to work now. That makes me think about the fact that healthcare is so intensely competitive. We talked about that a bit earlier, but you wrote recently that now you're seeing more healthcare providers and other stakeholders form consortia in order to share the data and also the responsibilities in building new platforms, figuring out best practices and the infrastructure really to support the innovation in care and privacy and patient management. So, what is your understanding of what led to this, I think, really profound business model change from hyper competition to at least some level of cooperation?
Yeah, and I think, we're still at the early stages of this, cooperation. Whether we can attribute that to the consulting firms, who knows, right? Um, but as we see a lot of it too there's been a change in just how systems are being paid, right? So we're going from a fee for service based system to more of a
Hmm.
value based payment system. So and if you can't show that your population, is getting healthier, you run the risk of actually closing down. So I think that that's also one of the turning points as to why we can start to see a lot more collaboration in this space.
That's interesting. I saw similar projects, although I think it may have also died on the vine, but on the entertainment side, specifically in music, where that's another hyper competitive, siloed on purpose industry
Mhm.
that is competing fiercely, but at a basic level, there's this minimal data and information that benefits all of the competitors. That they actually will be better if we know the name of the artist and whether it's been transferred and who is supposed to be paid, et cetera, who's the owner. And
Mhm.
so I can see in the healthcare space some basic information that makes all of the healthcare systems and healthcare providers function at a more optimal and efficient level in this way. And so I'm really excited about the direction of what you're working on. Tell us what you imagine for the next 2 to 5 years. What's your current strategy going forward without giving away all of your secrets? And what's the plan for Patientory in the future?
Yeah, I mean, right now we're focused on adoption, right? Being in an emergent space, it's really a race to the finish line.
Right.
um, So, as we build out more of our feature set, we're just looking to really appeal to both our enterprise and consumer groups. We actually just finished with the Oregon Enterprise Blockchain Venture Studio, which was an interesting experience. I think they're one of the first venture studios to really focus on enterprise adoption of
Hmm.
solutions in the country. So, we're definitely starting to see a lot more of the industry players start to um, invest in just the research of it for their organizations because, like the internet in the 90s, it's not going to, it's definitely not going to go away. So,
Right.
so that's our main goal for the next 5 years.
I love it. And I know no business entity or certainly entrepreneurial endeavor can move forward without a strong team. You are the leader at the helm, but because this is Tech Intersect and we talk about law and we've certainly talked about technology. But right before we close out, a bit about business. How has that been for you personally and professionally as you pull together a team from all different walks of life in a really hyper competitive industry? What was that process like for you, for the entrepreneurs who will be listening to this as well?
Yeah, well, if I said if it was easy, I would definitely be lying, right? Especially as a woman of color in
Yes,
high tech and in healthcare, where majority men, um,
yes,
especially white men at that. I was just
yes.
recently quoted in an article that stated that there are only less than 12% of female leaders in the healthcare industry.
Wow.
Um, so it's and I my the first month of starting the company, I got accepted into an accelerator in actually Boulder, Colorado, which was predominantly white men. I was the only
Right,
female of color there, so I would say it's definitely been challenging, because of my age, of my race, especially
right.
in a very conservative space. But I've definitely been able to find great advisors who are very supportive, and been able to bring together a team, um, who can understand and see the vision for the industry to really push forward.
That's an important part for people to understand. And you mentioned earlier the arc of success for innovation in the space is an average of a decade, right? To
Yeah.
begin with. So this is not for the faint of heart, but you also come from entrepreneurs and people who work from can't see to can't see, as my parents for sure. So you came into the world with that kind of entrepreneurial spark and certainly that lifelong learner and intellectual curiosity that is essential when you are working on something and believing in a vision that hasn't fully come together yet, but you still
Yeah.
keep moving forward. That's really, really important. So tell listeners how they can connect with you and learn more about Patientory, because I hope I'm introducing people to something that will look back a decade from now or maybe 5 years. You've been in the game for a minute and say,
Yeah.
I remember when.
Yeah.
And now we all have this app and it's like changing our lives. So tell us again how they can connect with you and certainly Patientory.
Absolutely. Well, I am on Twitter at Chrissa Tanelia, which is Tanelia. You can also, listen to our company tweets at Patientory. Check out our website at patientory.com. I'm also writing about this on Forbes, so you can check out my Forbes column, and also recently published a book on future women and minority entrepreneurship in blockchain and healthcare, which is also available on Amazon.
Absolutely. I'm going to, in my postscript, in fact, I want to pump the brakes 1 second. Tell us about this book. And you did in the notes that you sent to me, it was very prominently displayed, and I wonked out on all the tech. Let's take a step back. There's no rush here. There's no rush. We have to talk about this book. And then I will definitely drop
Yeah.
a link in the show notes to it for purchase. So forget what I said about ending. We are beginning again, and we are talking about this book. Okay, tell me all about it.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's really more of a deep dive. I think today we gave a great overview into, Patientory, my experience as a founder. But in the book, I really explore female mindsets to have, as a woman of color starting a business. It really goes into my background, you know, through my lens, and how I was able to really jump off, take that next step, and really go for something I was both passionate about, believed in, at a time when no one really understood what was going on or what I was talking about.
Right.
So I go through those different mindsets, and really in taking on the stories of other female women of color in the space who've had success and both failures, to really get a sense of how we can continue to build up our communities, but also start to leave legacies.
Absolutely. Legacy and generational wealth are critical parts, particularly in communities of color, because oftentimes we have to start from the beginning over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
And we're not ever really starting over, because if you have to hit the restart button and build your own in your own generation, that means you're behind. And that, becomes this process generation after generation where we fall farther behind. Even though we also know that Black women are the most educated in America. I'll drop a link in the show notes for that information that supports that fact. But the idea of not just creating something for this moment that solves the problem, offers a solution, but also with an eye toward what the generations that follow will have in terms of legacy. And that's a really important part of the story. And it's I'm so grateful that you wrote the book, because people won't ever really, in the 20 minutes that we have on a stage, or when you're spending hours and hours behind the scenes building, people don't really know who was the genesis or the origin of what people see. They just see the final product, right? I would love to, sometimes I do what's called, what an AMA is, or an Ask Me Anything, with some of the guests that who come through. And I'd love to talk a bit more about that and get into the heart of the book and have people understand that side of the process, which is as important as the product or the service and solving the problems.
Exactly.
Perfect. Well, now we really will end. I'm so glad for the reminder. Again, I will drop all of this information in the show notes. Chrissa McFarlane, it's a pleasure. I wish you nothing but the best, and I see nothing but continued success. Thank you for joining me. Digital health is still an emerging space, but perhaps it's being thrust into the forefront now given the COVID-19 pandemic that's shocked and completely upended the healthcare and financial systems globally. The issues and challenges that Chrissa set out to solve with Patientory of managing and owning one's patient records, the right to remove information and authorization is needed now more than ever. The healthcare enterprise needs to move to a universal healthcare system and into the 21st century and Web 3.0. Imagine how much more efficient, private, and secure patient information would be in the midst of the current pandemic with a solution like Patientory. I think of the people who are sheltering in place in a state or country other than their own hometown, who may have no access to their own records, and that really, really has to change. But why is blockchain's distributed ledger the solution for patient ownership of data? Well, electronic records are mostly siloed with no interoperability. The ability to track data, therefore, becomes very difficult, if not sometimes impossible. Blockchain resolves the silo problem with decentralized storage of patient data, which opens up so many possibilities for patient control, for research, and development. It's really a whole new world. Patientory empowers end users globally with a secure platform to manage and transfer their health data, to achieve actionable insights for improved health outcomes and well-being. But adoption is challenging in a conservative industry built on competition, and one that is not at all eager to develop a cooperative model. Perhaps the realities of this horrific pandemic might move us closer to that model, though. The ability for someone diagnosed, for example, with novel coronavirus, who develops into COVID-19 and who has underlying issues and may need a specific course of action or a specific drug, but is in distress and unable to communicate, with no family around. What would care look like if a blockchain solution like Patientory could provide the link between patient and provider, regardless of insurance or location or siloed information? It's truly what the world needs now, and I really look forward to seeing entrepreneurs like Chrissa and tech companies like Patientory save the day and maybe just save humanity in the process. Okay, that's it for now. Be safe, stay home if you can, find moments of gratitude even in the midst of all this confusion, and until next time, continue to shine.
Stay in touch with host Tanya Evans via your favorite social media. On Twitter at Tech Intersect and on Instagram via the handle Tech Intersect. This podcast has been produced by Stephanie Renee for Soul Sanctuary Incorporated.